most people know how many miles are on their car, right? But if you ask them how much visceral fat do you have, how much total body fat you have, it's just a blank stare.
Individuals with high visceral fat have a 44% increase risk of developing type 2 diabetes. That's crazy.
Your body, it's like one of our superpowers as human beings. We're really good at storing fat. That's a feature, it's not like a bug.
Our ancestors used to have to hunt for food and search days and days. We could literally order from expending 1 calorie of energy using our fingertips to order Uber Eats.
The key to zone 2 and knowing that you're in zone 2 is really like, if you're about to finish and I walk up to you and say, you need to do this for another 20 minutes, you could still do it for another 20 minutes because you're not exhausted.
HIIT is the hammer. Zone 1 and zone 2 are the screwdriver. If your goal is visceral fat reduction and metabolic health, you need the screwdriver. You need zone 1 and zone 2.
Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining health span and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to the MD Longevity Lab podcast where we are playing the long game. I'm your host, Vikas Patel, and I'm joined here by my awesome, beautiful co-host and wife, Nisha Patel.
Hi everyone.
How are you doing this week, Nish?
I'm doing well. I did my first ever Pilates class. Hard to believe.
How'd that go?
I'm not a Pilates girl. Let's just say that. I'm glad I did it. I was pulled out of my comfort zone by one of my friends, and I'm glad she took me. I will say I have more respect for the Pilates people out there because it is harder than I thought it would be. I will also say that it 100% confirms we thought, which is Pilates is not a substitute for resistance training. And people are holding 5 and 7 pound weights. And while it's great for mobility and core strength, it is in no way a substitute for heavy resistance training. So I'll say that. It's something I may incorporate once or twice a year into my routine for sure.
You also graduated this week to deadlifting over your body weight for working sets.
I did. And I asked you to widen the hallways.
Yes, she has a Kim K behind now.
That's my goal.
That happened this week.
It was overnight.
All right, guys. So I think you guys will find this podcast timely, given it's still the start of the new year and everyone's thinking about getting healthier, maybe dropping a little bit of that holiday weight. If you spend any time on social media and been trying to figure out how you're supposed to actually lose fat, you've probably been told 100 different things about what you're supposed to do. You know, do HIIT, do fasted cardio, no, lift heavy weights, no, do cold plunges, take this supplement, drink apple cider vinegar, try keto, how about carnivore diet? Mm-hmm. Try the potato diet. Yes, that is actually a thing. It's like exhausting. And most of it is just pure noise, contradictory, confusing noise, really just designed to get clicks more than anything. It's not designed to get results. And I think the problem with all this is that when everything becomes a priority, like nothing is a priority. And when every influencer has a different secret hack, you end up paralyzed on what you're actually supposed to do. You're bouncing from one protocol to another and really not sticking with any one thing. So today, our plan was to try and simplify some of this noise for you. We're going to try and cut through some of that clutter and give you some actionable steps that are actually backed by science and actually do work at helping to reduce those most dangerous of the stored calories, right? The ones that are stored as fat inside of our visceral compartment underneath our abdominal muscles.
Yeah. And we're going to do that the way we do everything at MD Longevity Lab, which is with measurement, precision, and with the long game in mind, right?
Absolutely. Here's what we're going to try and cover on this episode. First, we're going to talk about why you can't fix what you don't measure. Exactly. So here's what we're going to cover on this episode. I think lots of us put on a little bit of holiday weight, right? The plan is to cover how do we reduce some of that extra body fat that we have. And really the main topic here is how do we target some of that visceral fat that is most dangerous to our health. So first, we're going to talk about why you can't really fix what you don't measure, right? And why DEXA scan is really the starting point for anyone who's serious about their metabolic health. Second, we're going to break down what visceral fat actually is, why it is so dangerous, and why it's different than the fat that you might see when you look at yourself in the mirror and just pinch your skin. Third, we're going to go into an explanation of what zone 1 cardio is and what zone 2 cardio is, what they are, how they're different, and why they are the most effective tools at burning total body fat and visceral fat, and really an understanding for you guys of how to improve your body's fuel utilization. The fourth thing that we want to cover is really the trap of HIIT training, high intensity interval training, why those really intense workouts might actually be working against your fat loss goals, even though they do feel productive and are productive for something other than fat loss. Fifth, we're going to cover how to find your true zones for training, why your watch might give you an estimate of VO2 max, but it doesn't really give you good precision on the tools that you really need for how to target your training properly. I think we'll try and cover some stories on patients as well. 6, we're going to explain the hunger paradox and why zone 1 especially and zone 2 to a large degree don't leave you feeling ravenous, needing to consume back all the calories the same way that a high intensity interval training session might, and how this is going to matter as far as from a sustainability standpoint. Finally, I think we'll talk a little bit about why this testing isn't really just a one and done situation. As time goes on, your body changes, your zones are going to change, and annual testing is really how we dial in those zones moving forward.
That sounds good. I think it's so important to emphasize we've had patients feeling very confused with social media, what they're seeing with influencers on do this workout or that workout, what zone 2 is, what HIIT is. And we hope by the end of this episode, we can really simplify all of these concepts so that you actually are armed with the knowledge to burn some fat and ideally burn some visceral fat too. So let's get into it.
Yeah. So we started with you can't really fix what you don't measure, right? And I think that obviously that sounds obvious, almost annoyingly simple, but most people are flying blind when it comes to their health in this regard. You know, we tend to track like how much money is in our bank account and obsess over what your credit score is. Most people know how many miles are on their car, right? But if you ask them how much visceral fat do you have, how much total body fat you have, it's just a blank stare. Like they don't know. If you ask them what their VO2 max is, again, blank stare. So this is really kind of the key in we have to figure out a standard of what the measurements are that really matter.
Yeah. And most people are just guessing, right? They're following that generic advice from the internet and they're just hoping for the best. And here's the thing, visceral fat is not the fat that you can see or pinch. It's the fat that's packed around your organs, around your liver, your pancreas, your heart. And that's that inflammatory radioactive fat that's quietly trying to kill you, literally. while you're worried about how your jeans are fitting. So this is not fat that you can see in the mirror. You can't estimate it by how your clothes fit. You can be relatively thin. We have patients with a completely normal BMI or low BMI and still be carrying a ton of that dangerous visceral fat. We call that the TOFI, right? TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. Skinny fat is another term for it. And yes, that's a real medical term, TOFI. We didn't make it up for this podcast. We can't claim credit for it. But the gold standard for measuring visceral fat is that full body DEXA scan. And it gives you a full breakdown, not only of your total body fat, but your lean muscle mass, your bone health. And specifically, when we break down total body fat, it gives us that exact precise measurement of what your visceral fat is.
Generally, I think most people have never had one done. They're using a scale, and the scale doesn't typically tell you a whole lot of super useful data. Sometimes people are using a BMI, which is a body mass index. That's literally a 200-year-old formula that does not distinguish between muscle or fat. Truly, by BMI standards, most NFL running backs are morbidly obese, and that's absurd. These guys are typically like at 13%, 12% body fat and are in peak physical condition, yet BMI would say that they're overweight, grossly overweight. So a DEXA scan takes about 10-ish minutes. It's painless. It gives you a baseline, like a real number that you can track over time longitudinally to say, hey, these are the changes that are happening to my lean muscle mass, to my total body fat percentage, most importantly, to my visceral body fat percentage, so that we all have a genuine clue as to, are we actually getting better from a health perspective?
Yeah, and this is where the magic happens with patients. Once someone has their full body DEXA scan results, everything changes. We're no longer giving blanket advice like eat less, move more, like every other doctor's visit or personal trainer that they've been to. We're looking at their specific data and creating a targeted plan for them.
Let me give you an example. We had a patient, I'll call him Mike, early 50s, looked really fit, exercised regularly.
Not Michael Jordan.
Not Michael Jordan.
He's not our patient yet.
I don't think he's quite as trim as he used to be.
Michael Jordan, if you are listening to the MD Longevity Lab podcast, we are accepting new patients.
We'd love to take care of you and get you back to game form.
Yeah.
Late 90s form, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Right. So not that Mike, early 50s, overall had a decent diet, looked in clothes at least reasonably fit. He came to us because he felt like he had hit a plateau. Nothing really seemed like it was changing for him, despite him putting in some genuine effort to improve his health. We did a DEXA scan on him, and his total body fat percentage was actually not that bad. It was around 24%. The average body fat percentage for a male in the United States right now is around 28%. So he was really doing better than average, but his visceral fat was off the charts. So well above what we would consider the normal or healthy range. And his muscle mass also turned out to be lower than where it should have been for someone who claimed to be working out for years.
Yeah, so now we know exactly what the problem is. It's not total fat, it's visceral fat specifically. And his workout team, which was composed of lots of cardio, not a ton of resistance training, was not at all addressing it. He was doing these crazy HIIT Orange Theory workouts and no resistance training, and he was spinning his tires. And a lot of times those excessive HIIT workouts could be contributing to a lot of those problems as well. So with that data, with Mike and his DEXA scan, we could be precise. We shifted to prioritizing zone 1 and zone 2 training for fat burning and improved the substrate utilization and addressed his resistance training too for muscle mass. 6 months later, we retested his full body DEXA scan and VO2 max. His visceral fat had dropped significantly. His muscle mass skyrocketed. His weight on the scale stayed roughly the same, but his body composition had completely transformed. And as a byproduct, he felt better, which is awesome. But without the DEXA scan and that VO2 max, we would have been completely guessing. So the DEXA scan, all of these tests that we're doing are completely targeted. And that's the difference between generic advice that you're going to hear on the internet and precise medicine.
Yeah, I think it's worth touching on what it is about visceral fat that really gives it the reputation for it being the most dangerous type of fat, because not all fat is really treated equal. The subcutaneous fat, which is, the fat that we can actually pinch under our skin, that's pretty benign. It doesn't really cause much of a problem. It's just there purely for storage, right? When we don't eat and we need energy, we break down that subcutaneous fat for energy. And that's where it's supposed to be, stored underneath our skin. The visceral fat, however, is something totally different. Visceral fat is, unfortunately, it has metabolic activity. It's not just sitting there, it's kind of doing bad things within our body. Think of visceral fat as almost like a rogue endocrine organ. It's pumping these inflammatory cytokines, and it ends up disrupting the normal hormone balance within our body. It ends up interfering with the way that insulin signaling occurs, and it's basically running a 24/7 sabotage operation on our metabolism.
Yeah, here's a stat for you guys to digest. Individuals with high visceral fat have a 44% increase risk of developing type 2 diabetes. That's crazy. And this is independent of their total body weight. So you can be completely normal weight by every standard measure and still be at massively elevated risk for things like type 2 diabetes, dementia, cancer, cardiovascular disease, elevated risk because of where your fat is stored. And it doesn't stop there. Visceral fat is strongly linked to cardiovascular disease, which we've touched on other episodes. Studies show that visceral adiposity is a better predictor of heart attack and stroke than BMI or even total body fat percentage. And how many cardiologists are testing for visceral fat? Virtually none. So this is an easy test that we could be doing on every single patient, but we're not. So it's not how much fat you have, it's where it's stored. Visceral fat is associated with increased risk of certain cancers, colorectal, breast, pancreatic cancer. It's linked to fatty liver disease. NAFLD is the medical term for it, which is now the most common liver disease in America. And it's directly connected to cognitive decline and dementia. So this is not about cosmetics. This is literally survival.
I think it's important to understand a part of the evolutionary context here. Your body, it's like one of our superpowers as human beings. We're really good at storing fat. That's a feature. It's not like a bug, right? For most of human history, calories were scarce. Like we had to really work hard to get calories. And the ability to store calories when we were in those really lean times was a survival advantage. And this is really where the mismatch comes in. We evolved to store calories. We did not evolve to store this much fat in this pattern with this level of caloric excess that we enjoy in today's environment. Our ancestors would accumulate some visceral fat really just during times of plenty, and then they would burn it off during times of scarcity, right? So in the summer, when everything's in bloom and you're able to harvest more honey, fruits, vegetables, even wild game, you put on fat. Then come the winter times where everything is out of season, you're really working off of what you've stored in your body and what you've stored as a stockpile, which barely gets you through the next season, right? Today, there's literally no scarcity, right? Like we go to Costco pretty frequently, and Costco has never yet run out of calories.
There's a McDonald's on every corner. There's food. Literally, you don't even have to take 10 steps to get food. Our ancestors used to have to hunt for food and search days and days, we could literally order from expending 1 calorie of energy using our fingertips to order Uber Eats or DoorDash.
Costco delivers.
Yeah. We're big Costco fans because we're old. We don't do DoorDash. All these Gen Zers just waste all this money on DoorDash, spending $12 on a cup of Starbucks delivered to their workplace. I don't get it. Anyway, modern processed foods are engineered to override your satiety signals, and it makes it so much worse. You're not overeating because of your lack of willpower. You're overeating because the food is literally designed to make you overeat. We've talked about this in previous episodes, specifically our episode on ultra processed foods. So visceral fat accumulates year after year, quietly, insidiously, without obvious symptoms until one day it manifests as a diagnosis. Maybe it's diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver, a new cancer diagnosis. By then, you're playing catch up, right? The long game is about getting ahead of that, measuring it now, addressing it now before your visceral fat becomes a crisis and we have to put out a fire.
So how do you actually burn visceral fat? Well, I think this is where some of this conversation becomes counterintuitive, because the answer is not what I think most people just expect. It's not the intense exercise or workout. It's not the sweat drenched, heart pounding, gasping for air session. It's actually the low intensity zone 1 and zone 2 training, which is honestly like the most boring, unsexy, underrated workouts in existence, right? They're arguably the most beneficial for metabolic health, but we don't really enjoy doing them because they don't feel like a lot of work, and quite frankly, they are boring.
Can we define what zone 1 and zone 2 are? Because I think these terms are thrown around a lot and our listeners are very smart, but I've had some patients ask questions like, I don't even know what that is. Can you break it down? So give it to us straight. What's zone 1 and what's zone 2?
Zone 1 is very low intensity. It's roughly, and this is going to vary from person to person, but it's roughly 55 to 65% of your maximum heart rate. This is where you are truly at a completely conversational pace. So if you're walking, you can hold a conversation and nobody would think that you're doing any sort of exercise. Whoever you're talking to, if you're talking on the phone, right? You have your headphones in and you're talking on the phone, they shouldn't really know that you're doing anything because the conversation is coming that easily. That is typically zone 1. Zone 2 is a little bit different. So in zone 2, you're up to typically somewhere around 60, 65 to 70, 75% of your maximum heart rate. And in this zone, you're still able to hold a conversation, but the other person on the other end of the line might notice that you're breathing a little bit heavier. You can still finish your sentences. You're not really feeling uncomfortable. You're definitely not suffering. You're not feeling like I'm doing a ton of work. The key to zone 2 and knowing that you're in zone 2 is really like, if you're about to finish and I walk up to you and say, you need to do this for another 20 minutes, you could still do it for another 20 minutes because you're not exhausted. You're not feeling like I have really taxed myself. That's what makes this unsexy. Most of us feel like when we're trying to do exercise that we should feel the burn. And when we finish, it feels good to know that I put in the work because I actually feel bad. That must have benefited me. There is a benefit to that type of exercise, but that benefit is not the best for fuel utilization, which we're going to talk about, and burning calories, specifically fat calories and visceral fat calories, which is what the goal is here. Zone 1 is almost completely fat burning, and zone 2 is a mix of fat and glucose burning.
I think it's also important to emphasize that everyone's zone 1 and 2 are completely different. Your zone 1 is not my zone 1. Your zone 2 is not my zone 2. Even my zone 1 and 2 were completely different last year compared to this year as I've evolved in my training and my body composition has shifted. So that's why it's so important to test for this. And we'll get into that testing. But the numbers fluctuate and there are some proxies for measurements that we can use, but it is something that once you know those numbers and you have that information, you are training smarter, not harder.
You're right. The reason that we emphasize both of those zones and why you're advocating for doing testing specifically is because of the type of calorie that we burn and how this changes or evolves over a long period of time, right? In zone one, you're almost burning all fat. Fat burning is a very slow process. And when we're doing low levels of exertion, our body has time to liberate the energy from fat. And that's what our preferred fuel source is.
Can you talk about our two fuel sources and differentiate that?
There's more than two, right? So there's also protein, but for this conversation, the things that we're worried most about are fat and carbohydrates. So the fat that we've stored that we're talking about, right? Whether we've stored that fat under our skin or in the viscera, and then sugar, which our body breaks down into glucose and then stores as glycogen. Glycogen is something that is stored only in our muscle tissue, nowhere else. And fat is stored everywhere. So when we are in zone one and zone two, we are primarily burning fat calories. The zone two, the difference between zone one and zone two is that we've upped our exertion enough that the slow burn of fat isn't quite enough. And now we're using a little bit of sugar as well. We're using a little bit of that glycogen.
And when you say sugar, I think it's getting a little confusing. Your body has two main fuel sources, carbohydrates or fat. And we are trying to dip into the fat. If you're burning carbohydrates, you're hungry after a workout, right? So the whole point of targeting zone one and zone two is to try and stay in fat burning rather than carbohydrate burning. So we're trying to activate our body to utilize fat rather than carbohydrates. I hope that makes sense.
That's truly the point of zone one training. So if somebody comes to us and and we've tested them, or someone knows that, hey, I'm probably 30 pounds overweight. My primary goal right now is to lose weight. Our prescription is typically zone one training initially, right? You want to walk because when you're walking and you know that you're in the right zone, you're primarily burning fat calories. The benefit to doing zone two training is that you're still burning a fair amount of fat calories, but you're teaching your body how to get better at burning fat calories. If you go too hard, which is a lot of times what people do with HIIT training, right? They've stopped burning fat calories and they're just burning the carbohydrate calories. Now you're not teaching your body how to better utilize fat, which is why we really prioritize with our patients walking, low level cardio, which is not very intense. That's just putting you into that zone two category where you are explicitly using both fat and carbohydrate.
Yeah, when you train extensively in that zone two, you're essentially training your body to prefer fat as a fuel source rather than carbohydrates. Your mitochondrial density increases, your fat oxidation capacity improves. The enzymes involved in fat metabolism start upregulating. Over time, with consistent zone two training, you become metabolically flexible. Your body gets way better at accessing those fat stores for fuel, even at slightly higher intensities. So I remember when I did my first VO2 max test, my zone two, the range was like, I don't know, 100 to 120. 1 year later, after training properly, I increased my zone two from 100, I think all the way up to 150. I was still in zone two. So my body just became more efficient at burning fat. And this is where the visceral fat really comes off. That magic of zone two isn't just that you're burning fat during the workout. It's that you're reprogramming your entire metabolic machinery. You're becoming way more efficient at fat burning 24/7, not during exercise. Imagine if we told you could just burn fat while you're sleeping. Everyone would sign up.
Think of it kind of like a hybrid car. Zone 1 is the pure electric mode, 100% fat burning. Zone 2 is mostly electric with occasional gas assist. You're still predominantly burning fat, but there's some carbs mixed in. But the more miles that you log in zone 2, overall, the more efficient that electric motor gets, the more fat burning you actually end up doing, and the wider the range. You can actually go faster and still stay in that fat burning. That's really where the magic is with zone 2.
So, practically speaking, how do we recommend to patients how to use and apply these zones?
For the most part, we really recommend a mix of training, right? So zone 1 is excellent for the recovery days, long walks, easy bike rides, times when you want to burn fat without any real metabolic cost to you. Zone 2 is where you're building your aerobic engine, where you're actually utilizing oxygen as a substrate along with glucose and fat. But the goal there is really that you're burning plenty of fat calories while you're doing it. And we have decent data on this, right? So a study in the Journal of Applied Physiology found that consistent, moderate intensity exercise, really zone 2 exercise, led to greater reductions in visceral fat compared to higher intensity interval training, even when total calories burned were exactly the same. So same calories burned, yet more visceral fat loss. Why would that happen? It really happens because of these metabolic adaptations that we're talking about. Subjects who trained in zone 2 just became better at burning fat around the clock, not just during the workouts when they're exercising.
Yeah. And once we explain this to patients, it's like a light bulb goes off. We had a patient, we'll call her Sarah.
Not Nisha.
Not Nisha, just to clarify. She was in her mid 40s in the throes of perimenopause. And she had been doing Orange Theory 4 times a week for 2 years. She was exhausted, hungry all the time. And it was interesting because her visceral fat numbers weren't budging. The scale wasn't budging. She felt like she was spinning her tires. And she thought she was doing everything right. She was putting in the time, showing up, working hard. But all of her workouts, she was pretty much in zone 4 and 5 the entire time. Never once in that fat burning zone, never training her body to improve its substrate utilization. So we got her VO2 max results back and we showed her exactly where her zone 1 and zone 2 were and shifted her routine. So we incorporated 2 zone 1 sessions, long, easy walks, which was counterintuitive for her. She's like, feel like I'm not even working, but I'm working. We're like, just commit to the plan. We also incorporated 2 zone 2 sessions on the bike. And we did 1 HIIT session. She loves Orange Theory, and we didn't want to take that away from her. We still kept 1 Orange Theory HIIT session for VO2 max. And within 4 months, her visceral fat dropped from a unhealthy range, a high risk range, into that healthy range. And she told us she actually enjoyed her workouts for the first time in years. She felt well rested. Her perimenopausal symptoms improved because, yes, when you reduce visceral fat, all those inflammatory cytokines, they have no place to go, right? They're not being produced at that level. So she just felt better. And it was also because she wasn't destroying herself during every workout session.
I think it's important to know, like, there's a true benefit to those Orange Theory sessions, right? Most patients that we see that do Orange Theory workouts, their VO2 maxes are actually really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the problem isn't that they don't have a good VO2 max. The problem is that they're only training VO2 max. They're not actually training for what sometimes is the goal for that particular patient. So Sarah's goal was, I want to lose weight. I need to get visceral fat down. I need to feel like I have more energy, right? I don't want to have these crashes throughout the day where I keep feeling like I have to eat, because if I don't eat, I go into this kind of food coma thing that happens, right? So that's the beauty of this zone 1 and zone 2. Your body gets really flexible on switching between burning fats and burning carbohydrates. So you don't get those crashes after you've eaten where you feel like you need to fuel again.
So why isn't it that everyone isn't doing zone 1 and 2? It's counterintuitive because it feels like you're not doing enough, right? We've been conditioned to believe that effective workouts mean suffering all of the time, no pain, no gain, go hard or go home, sweat is fat crying. It's that Instagram fitness philosophy, very scientific.
I like that. Sweat is fat crying.
I feel like at one of these crazy HIIT classes I took, I don't know if it was Barry's boot camp or something, HIIT, high intensity interval training, has become the darling of the fitness world for years. And look, you would mention HIIT has its benefit. It does improve VO2 max. It's time efficient. So if you're really busy, lots of kids, you're working, it's a great way to get in a workout. It has cardiovascular benefits. But here's what most people don't understand. HIIT doesn't burn fat. It's not a fat burning workout. So that explains why so many patients who are doing these crazy HIIT workouts 4 or 5 times a week, they're putting more hours in than we are, but they're spinning their tires, right?
I think there's another piece of this. At that intensity, when you're really working out hard, your body goes into the sympathetic overdrive, right? That's the fight or flight part of our central nervous system. Your cortisol goes up, your adrenaline surges. This is great when you're running from a predator, right? The cheetah is attacking. I don't know. I've never been chased by a cheetah, but
I've never been chased by a cheetah. There's a first time for everything.
There's a first time for everything. It's not so great for the purpose of trying to burn visceral fat. So cortisol is a stress hormone, and it actually promotes visceral fat storage. It's one of the reasons that chronic stress is really so strongly linked to abdominal obesity. If you're doing these intense workouts and you're thinking that you're burning fat, what's actually happening is that you're in a hormonal state that ends up promoting fat storage if you're not careful with how many calories you're consuming after the workout. I think that's a big chunk of this like missing piece here. If you're not really building that fat burning machinery within your body, you're not training your mitochondria to oxidize fat. You're not improving substrate utilization, and substrates are fat and carbohydrates. Really, all that you're doing with those workouts is depleting your glycogen, your sugar that's stored in your body, and then spiking cortisol. And this is really why people can do HIIT training for years and they never see their visceral fat budging. They do see their VO2 max either staying the same or getting better, but they're not actually seeing an improvement in their visceral fat. They're not teaching their body how to burn fat properly.
Yeah, and it's not that HIIT is bad. It's that it's being used for the wrong purpose. You shouldn't be doing a HIIT workout 4 or 5 times a week. HIIT is specifically for cardiovascular fitness. We do it ourselves. It's for improving your VO2 max, your body's maximum oxygen uptake capacity. It's for building speed, power, healing capacity. That's that one metric. That's that gold metric that we all want to shoot for.
Super important.
Yeah. But your HIIT workouts are not for burning visceral fat or improving your metabolic flexibility. That is your zone 1 and zone 2 job. So think of it this way. You would not use a hammer to turn a screw. Well, you're the handyman in the family, but I think that was a good analogy.
I've tried.
That's something I would do. But both are useful tools, right? The hammer and, I don't know, a saw, a chainsaw, but they do different things. HIIT is the hammer. Zone 1 and zone 2 are the screwdriver. If your goal is visceral fat reduction and metabolic health, you need the screwdriver. You need zone 1 and zone 2.
I think most people learn this the hard way, right? so many people who have this goal of weight loss, they do these intense workouts. You mentioned Orange Theory, Barry's Boot Camp, spin classes where instructor is screaming at you, Peloton. There's so many different ways to do that. Interval, zone 4, zone 5. Your heart rate goes through the roof. You're drenched in sweat. You walk away feeling like, I absolutely crushed this thing. And then you get home and either you're ravenous or you've been doing this for a while. You're not ravenous, but your biology, your central nervous system will absolutely make sure that over the next 2 to 3 meals that you're going to make up the calories that you just expended, because your body is very, very stingy when it comes to carbohydrate utilization. If you use carbs to exercise, your body will make it up. It will cause you to crave some food to make up the deficit, whether it happens in the sense that I'm starving or it's bit by bit. For the people who are very well trained, they'll just eat 4 or 5 extra bites of food with each of their subsequent meals and make up the calories. So I think one of the things that we really have to understand is that feeling exhausted after a workout is typically going to spike those hunger cues afterwards. And that is not going to end up netting the visceral fat loss that we really want. It's not going to budge. I think most of those people end up getting frustrated, and many times they just stop working out, right? Because this isn't working for what their goal was.
Yeah, they're exhausted, they're hungry all the time, and the visceral fat doesn't budge, and they get frustrated, and rightfully so. And it turns out they were pretty much overtraining and burning carbs the entire time, and they were never tapping into that fat or making their body more metabolically flexible and tap into those fat stores. So their body never really got efficient at fat oxidation. And what happens, like what I learned specific to me is, okay, when I do these crazy workouts, no wonder I'm freaking starving afterwards. And yeah, the rest of the day, I'm like, I earned this. I can have this donut. I can have the pasta. It's because your body is biologically craving those, because when I'm in zone 4 and 5, I've burned through carbohydrates, and we'll get into it later, but that's where that VO2 max test, it literally shows you when your body flips the switch where you are no longer burning fat and you are just burning carbohydrate. So for me, that was a huge eye opener, and that helped me pull back and really rearrange my workouts.
I think this is pretty common. Most people's perception of exertion is completely disconnected from what's actually happening metabolically. The optimal approach here is really, and what we recommend to our patients is really, this is a pyramid, right? Zone 1 and zone 2 are the foundation of that pyramid, and 3 to 4 sessions a week, call it 30 to 45 minutes, an hour if you have that kind of time. That's your zone 1 and zone 2, the fat burning foundation, right? The base. And then the next layer is really the high intensity. 1 or 2 sessions a week of that is plenty to get the cardiovascular benefit. Totally different if you're training for, marathons and endurance things. But for the vast majority of people, they really need this base of zone 1, zone 2, and then 1 day a week of doing this high intensity. Okay, so here's part of the problem. A lot of times people think that they're in zone 2, but they're not. Just like Nisha was just referencing, right? People are going too hard. They think this feels pretty easy, I should push. And then they do push and they end up in zone 3. The vast majority of people who are exercising in zone 3. And then at the end, they may finish in zone 4, because that makes them feel like I exercise, I worked out today. Zone 1 and zone 2, for the majority of people who are not well trained, are relatively narrow windows. They're different for everyone. Your zone 2 is not the same as my zone 2. It depends intensely on what your particular fitness level is, what your mitochondrial efficiency is, and individual physiology. So you can get a rough estimate of what these numbers are from, smart watches. Most of them will calculate some sort of heart rate zone based on what it believes your max heart rate is. These are not specific. They basically use this formula, 220 minus your age, to estimate. And then they'll say, okay, 55 to 65% of your max heart rate is zone 1, 65 to 75 is your zone 2. If you're just getting started and you're using your watch, this is not a terrible way to figure these things out. These are good estimates, and you can probably make some gain there. The truth of the matter is that these are just population averages, and they're not personalized to you. So for some people, they are really pretty reasonably accurate, but for others, they're wildly off. And I've seen patients whose actual max heart rate is 20 beats higher or lower than what the formula predicts. And that throws off the zone calculations completely. Like, that's what mine is, right? So my predicted one that happens from these algorithms or calculations should be around 172 beats per minute, but my actual max heart rate is 196. So there's no way that if I'm just doing the normal estimate that would come out of my watch, that it would be right for me. Actually getting formal VO2 max testing really is the gold standard here, because not only will you learn what your VO2 max is, you find out what all the zones are in between, sitting down and that max capacity. We graph it out for patients. We can show them exactly, this is where your zone 1 is, your zone 2, zone 3, and then this is where your high intensity should end up being in those zone 4, zone 5 areas. I think that game changer is literally when you see on a graph, right? There's this crossover point where you shift primarily from burning fat to burning carbs. It's not a guess. We know when it's going to happen. It's this data that's directly measured when we do this VO2 max testing. And not only that, we can see this is the exact heart rate where you're at peak fat oxidation. You're burning the most amount of fat, right? And that's where your particular sweet spot is. And this is what you should target when you're trying to lose weight. So when you go over that, you start switching into more and more carbohydrate utilization. And as we mentioned, there is a ceiling to where there's a benefit to that. That ceiling is when you leave zone 2. After that, you're crossing into zone 3. And now you're not really targeting that fuel efficiency any longer. We do these tests at our clinic all the time, and I think they're pretty eye-opening for our patients. A lot of times someone thinks that their zone 2, based on their watch, says that it's 145 beats per minute. And then we test them and we find out, oh, actually their zone 2 is only 130 beats per minute. And they've been overtraining. They're just really depleting their glycogen stores, or sometimes it's the opposite. Their watch says that this is where they're supposed to be at, but that's too easy. They're not really in their effective zone 2 range, and they've been afraid to push, and they haven't been seeing the gains that they want to see.
Yeah, and once patients have this data, their training becomes so surgical. This happened with me. I remember a year ago, my VO2 max, my zone 2 told me, it was between 112 and 120 was that max fat burning. And for me, that ended up being like a 3-mile-an-hour walk on the treadmill with a 5 incline. I was kind of, after a year, spinning my tires, and we repeated my VO2 max. And then my zone 2 had shifted to 20 heart rate, 20 beats higher per minute. So now I can be a slow jog and still be in zone 2. So that's why it's so important to get this precise data on you, and it changes year to year. So what your zone 2 is today is going to be completely different than it is next year. And just like labs, we get labs tested every year on ourselves. This is so important to get tested. We had a guy who was a former college athlete, mid-40s, who was pretty frustrated because his fitness had declined and he could not lose that belly fat, that dad bod, no matter what he tried. He was doing what he had always done, which is those hard workouts, pushing himself. And we did his VO2 max test, and his zone 2 ceiling was 132 beats per minute. And his average heart rate during his quote unquote easy runs was 160. He was never once in zone 2, not once. So every single workout was burning carbs, spiking his cortisol. And though it was improving his VO2 max, it was doing nothing to improve that substrate utilization and improving his metabolic flexibility. So we gave him his numbers. He was pretty skeptical at first, right? 132 felt way too easy for him, but he trusted the process. 3 months later, we rechecked his DEXA scan and his visceral fat was cut in half. His endurance was up, and he told us that he felt better, right, than he had it in virtually over a decade. And more importantly, when we retested him, his VO2 max, his fat oxidation had improved. So his body had become more efficient at burning fat at that same exact heart rate that he was at before. So that's the adaptation we're after. That's exactly what we want, which is to make our bodies more efficient, right? Work smarter, not harder.
All right, I'll correct something that you said there. I don't think his VO2 max probably was budging that much. If he was training with a heart rate of around 160, his VO2 max will stay stable. You have to have a really robust zone 2 in order for your VO2 max to keep climbing. And so that's part of, what you're advocating for when you start doing a little bit more of that zone 2 training, your ability to then take advantage of your zone 2 training on that 1 day a week that you're doing the interval training, right? That allows your VO2 max to start climbing quite a bit higher. So this is kind of really the beauty of doing that testing, is that you really are able to figure out what that maximum oxygen uptake is, right? Like, what is the max that we can do? What is that VO2 going to be? It is the biggest predictor of your health. It's the biggest predictor of how long you're going to live. We have mentioned this numerous times before in the podcast, that knowing that number, knowing if you're in the bottom 25th percentile, right, that would tell you that unfortunately you're at roughly double the mortality risk of somebody who's in the top 25th percentile. So that low cardiorespiratory fitness is just a stronger predictor of death than whether you're a smoker, whether you have diabetes, whether you have high blood pressure. That's how important knowing this number is. It really does matter a lot. The long game connection here is that by doing the zone 2 training consistently, you're actually improving your ability to improve VO2 max over the long run. And it's not as dramatic as the HIIT training, because you don't feel that exhaustion, but it's way more sustainable. If you're doing zone 2 training 2 or 3 days a week and you're doing VO2 max training just once a week, it's a lot easier to mentally stomach, because zone 2 training is not exhausting. It should not feel exhausting.
We do zone 2 on our wine walks over the summer.
We do strap on a rucksack and put some weight in it. And we're not typically walking at 2 miles an hour. We'll be walking kind of at a good clip, closer to 4 miles an hour.
Yeah, a brisk pace.
A brisk pace with some extra weight and the occasional sip of wine.
Roadie sodies.
Roadie sodies.
Yeah. So let's touch on the hunger paradox and why zone 1 and 2 don't make you hungry. And here's something patients notice right away when they're starting to do zone 1 and 2 correctly. They're not starving afterwards like they would after their typical workouts. And this surprises people quite a bit. You just exercise for 45 minutes. Shouldn't you be hungry? Isn't that what normally happens? Because normally after a HIIT workout, you're ravenous. You could eat a horse. I could eat, sometimes if I go to one of those HIIT workout classes, I'll drive by McDonald's and I'm so tempted to go, because you want to devour everything in sight. After zone 1 and 2, though, not so much. And there's a physiologic reason for this, and it differs slightly between the two zones. Zone 1, we had talked about, is almost pure fat oxidation. So you basically barely touch the surface of glycogen, which are your glucose stores, and carbohydrate stores. Your body is essentially unlimited fat stores, especially in today's world, right? Even lean people have tens of thousands of calories of fat stored, including us. When you're burning exclusively fat, your body doesn't panic. There's no urgency to replenish. The fuel tank is still full, kind of like you talked about that electric car analogy. And this is why zone 1 is so powerful for fat loss. You can exercise for an hour and a half, and burn hundreds of calories from fat and feel no hungrier than when you started. It's metabolically silent. So that signal to your brain that I have burnt through glucose and I am starving just never clicks on.
So zone two does dip into some glucose. So there is a little bit more of that replenishment signal. But because fat is still the dominant fuel source, and because you're not really depleting glycogen all that significantly, your hunger response is pretty minimal, much more minimal compared to the higher intensity where you're doing almost zero fat burn and total glycogen burn. You may notice a slight or gentle hunger, but it's not that ravenous thing that you're talking about. It's not what happens after a HIIT. HIIT exercise is just completely different. You're burning carbs, your stored carbs in the form of glycogen in your muscles. Our body has a total of about 2,000 calories worth of glycogen stored. So if we do 45 minutes of high intensity cardio or 1 hour of high intensity cardio, a lot of times you can easily burn 900 calories, which is all carbs. Your body will say, oh my gosh, I just depleted half my stores of carbs. I need to refuel that immediately. And this is that paradox of why HIIT training does not actually end up netting this total weight loss, because your cues for your body are like, I must conserve glucose if there is a fight or flight event, meaning I'm in danger, I gotta run from an animal, or I'm shooting an animal, I gotta chase after it, right? I have to have the energy to do that. That energy is high intensity energy. That energy is glucose, it's glycogen. And your body will say, I need to refuel that.
Yeah, and this is why zone 1 and 2 are sustainable. Zone 1 and 2 don't require willpower to avoid overeating afterwards. Your body isn't fighting you. I'm a foodie. If anyone listening is also a foodie, you can relate to this. Sometimes I'll do this crazy HIIT workout and like, I deserve this. I earned this giant meal and you are starving. But with those zone 1 and 2 trainings, you're actually tapping into fat stores, and that signal never goes off for you to be hungry afterwards. And when you compare that to the traditional sweat session, right, doing those crazy workouts, feeling starving, trying to resist eating, eventually giving in, that's what inevitably happens. And then you're wondering why you're not losing fat. And it's because you're stuck in a cycle. It's work hard, get hungry, eat it back, repeat, right? And it continues.
And not just that, increase your cortisol, get those cortisol
Yep.
spikes from the HIIT, right? And that fuels this, that continues to fuel this process. So zone 1 and zone 2 are not sexy, they're not dramatic, but they do work in that long game formula. And it's really the consistency over time that beats that intensity. Most people, even if you just think about, I'm going to train for a long race, a 10-mile race, a half marathon, a marathon. It's that zone 2 training that nets the overall long-term gain, right? If you're able to do more zone 2 training, you end up getting faster in the long run. So I think those are the main key points here in how do we train our body to use fat, get rid of that visceral fat.
All right, so let's bring it all together, bring it home for our listeners. Visceral fat is that dangerous fat, right? The fat that you cannot see. That visceral fat is that inflammatory, active, radioactive fat that is undermining your metabolic health. It increases your risk of virtually every chronic disease, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, dementia. And you absolutely need to measure it. And the only way to precisely quantify your visceral fat is with a full body DEXA scan. So know your number. All right, number 2, zone 1 and zone 2 training are the most effective tools for reducing visceral fat. Not HIIT, not extreme dieting. It's consistent low to moderate intensity exercise that keeps you in that fat burning zone. Zone 1 is for pure fat oxidization with zero hunger signals. Zone 2 is for building that fat burning engine, like we talked about, training your body to become more efficient and become better at substrate utilization. So you burn more fat around the clock, even while you're sleeping, not just during exercise. Number 3, you need to know your true zones. A watch can give you a rough estimate, but the gold standard to know your zones is a full VO2 max test. It shows you exactly where your fat burning zones are and where they end. And when that switch flips on, where you're kicking to carbs and you are no longer burning fat. So stop guessing and get your VO2 max.
Number 4, and I think something critical that people miss, this isn't really a one and done, right? Your body changes over time. And as you get more fit, as your body composition changes, your zone 2 is going to change. Your zone 1 is going to change. And so it may end up shifting where your zone 2 is becoming larger over time. That is the superpower of these endurance athletes. They've managed to train enough that their zone 2 becomes huge over time, where they're able to do very high levels of exertion, but they're still burning some level of fat at those high levels of exertion. So you have to retest over time in order to know that, yes, these are my new zone levels. We pretty much recommend annual testing for patients for things like DEXA, track that body composition as well as VO2 max so that you're able to recalibrate those zones over a long period of time. It's almost like, an annual physical, and it gives you this actionable data. So this is how you really stay dialed in. This is really how you play the long game with precision over time.
Yeah, zone 1 and zone 2 are sustainable for decades, right? Even you can do them at age 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and beyond. They're low impact on joints. They don't require recovery days. They don't accumulate wear and tear. And you're not suffering. You're not dreading it and waking up completely afraid to go to the gym. You're not injured after it. You're not starving. You just have to stay consistent.
These are literally considered recovery zones. So training in those zones is not taxing for your body. That's what our bodies were actually designed for. They are truly recovery zones. So here's your action plan. Get the DEXA, know your visceral fat, get a baseline, right? 2, get your VO2 max test so that you know where your zones are, where your 1 and 2 are, so you're not fooling yourself. 3rd, build zone 1 and zone 2 into your weekly routine, especially if you need to make body composition changes, right? If you're already at the right body composition, then you can focus just on zone 2 training. You don't need to do the zone 1. 2, 3 of those sessions a week of zone 1 and 2, only one of those sessions for cardio VO2 max of the HIIT, right? That's the 4th layer of this. You do want to do HIIT training, but just once a week, really, so that you're keeping your VO2 max up as high as possible. The 5th is retest, right? Retest annually so that we can track changes to your body composition and how well you're using substrates, fat, and glucose, and where your VO2 max has gone to.
Yep. You can't fix what you don't measure. But once you measure it, you absolutely can fix it. And once you have the data, we're not giving you generic advice from a magazine or a reel or a YouTube clip. We're giving you precise, personalized plans based on your body and your physiology. And that's playing the long game. That's what we've done on ourselves. So thanks for listening, guys.
All right, everyone. Please let us know if you have any questions and keep playing the long game.
Yep. Take care of yourselves, your 85-year-old self, and your organs, which hopefully are not surrounded by visceral fat. Well, thank you.
Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.